The air in the Tribeca penthouse was thin, recycled, and smelled expensive, a blend of orchids, heavy cologne, and the metallic tang of ambition. Arthur Sterling stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, nursing a glass of sparkling water he didn't want, watching the city grid of New York glitter below like a massive, indifferent circuit board. He felt less like a guest, and more like a piece of furniture that hadn't been staged correctly. Across the room, under the cascading light of a modern chandelier that looked like shattered ice, stood his wife, Elena. She was radiant. Her dress, a liquid silver sheath, caught every flash of the photographer's camera. She was the woman of the hour, the CEO of Genova, the darling of the tech world, days away from an IPO that would turn paper millions into steel and glass reality. And standing barely an inch from her, with a hand hovering possessively near the small of her back, was Julian Thorne. Julian was everything Arthur was not, or, at least, everything Arthur had chosen not to be. Loud, impeccably tailored in Italian wool, with a smile that showed too many teeth and eyes that never actually smiled. He was the lead investor, the business partner who had injected $20 million into Elena's vision when the banks had said no. "Arthur, darling," a voice cut through the ambient jazz. Arthur turned to see a woman he vaguely recognized, a board member's wife, draped in pearls that cost more than his first car. "You must be so proud. Elena is simply rewriting the future." "She's worked very hard," Arthur said, his voice steady, practiced. "She deserves this." "It's good she has such robust support," the woman said, her eyes drifting meaningfully toward Julian, who was now whispering something into Elena's ear that made her throw her head back in laughter. It was a laugh Arthur hadn't heard in 2 years. A laugh that used to belong to him in their cramped Brooklyn apartment over takeout noodles. "Julian has been instrumental," Arthur conceded. "Oh, I'm sure," the woman smirked, patting Arthur's arm with condescending pity before drifting away. Arthur tightened his grip on the glass until his knuckles turned white. He wasn't blind. He knew what the whispers were. The trophy husband, the failed architect, the man who stayed home while his wife conquered the world. They thought he was oblivious, a simpleton content with spending his wife's allowance. The music lowered. A microphone feedback whine silenced the crowd. Julian Thorne stepped onto the small raised platform, raising a flute of vintage Dom Perignon. The room turned to him like sunflowers to a poisonous sun. He beckoned Elena to join him. She stepped up, her eyes shining, looking out at the crowd, looking past Arthur as if he were transparent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice smooth, baritone, commanding. "Tonight isn't just about money. It's about vision. It's about recognizing brilliance." He toasted. Elena, who beamed, to Elena Sterling, the brain, the heart, and the soul of Genova. Applause rippled through the room. Polite, wealthy applause. "But," Julian continued, holding up a hand, a playful glint in his eye, "we must not forget the support systems. The little people who keep the home fires burning while the titans shape the world." Arthur felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He knew what was coming. Julian scanned the crowd, his predatory gaze locking onto Arthur. "Arthur! Where are you, buddy?" The crowd parted. Arthur stood exposed, isolated against the window. "There he is!" Julian chuckled into the mic. "Let's hear it for Arthur. You know, folks, I asked Elena the other day, what is Arthur's role in the grand scheme of the IPO? And she told me, he keeps the Nespresso machine running and makes sure the dog gets walked." A wave of laughter crashed over the room. It wasn't warm. It was jagged. It was the laughter of the elite mocking the help. Arthur didn't move. He looked straight at Elena. He waited for her to shake her head, to take the mic, to say, "No, he's my rock. He's the one who stayed up 3 nights in a row coding the beta version when my engineers quit." Elena didn't speak. She didn't frown. She smiled. She took a sip of her champagne and looked down at her shoes, cheeks flushed, not with shame, but with the thrill of being on Julian's stage. In all seriousness, Julian continued, the mockery sharpening, every queen needs a jester, right? Someone to remind us that a simple life has its charms. Cheers to Arthur for staying out of the way so the adults can do business. To Arthur! Someone shouted from the back, followed by more jeering laughter. Arthur felt the vibration of his phone in his inner pocket. It was a notification from his bank, the joint account. A massive withdrawal. Another business expense at a hotel in the Hamptons for next weekend. He looked at Julian preening on the stage. He looked at Elena, who was now leaning into Julian's shoulder, effectively publicly claiming him. The humiliation wasn't the breaking point. It was the clarity. Arthur placed his untouched water on a passing waiter's tray. He adjusted his cuffs. He didn't storm out. He didn't throw a punch. That was what a weak man would do. That was what they expected. Instead, he nodded politely at Julian, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He turned and walked toward the terrace door, pulling his phone out. The screen glowed in the twilight. He scrolled past Elena to a number he hadn't dialed in 5 years, a number saved simply as the old man. The wind on the terrace was biting, whipping his jacket. Behind the glass, the party raged on, a silent movie of excess. Arthur pressed call. It rang once. "Arthur!" A voice rasped on the other end, old, dry, and powerful as the bedrock of the city. "I didn't think I'd hear from you until the funeral." "Hello, Jonathan," Arthur said, his voice calm, carrying the weight of a structural engineer who has just identified the critical flaw in a skyscraper. "I'm at the Gen Nova launch party. I assume Julian is making a spectacle of himself?" "He is," Arthur said. He watched through the glass as Julian whispered something to Elena, his hand sliding lower on her waist. "I'm ready to execute the clause, Jonathan. And I have the forensic files on the seed funding you asked for." A pause on the line. Then a low, satisfied chuckle. "You're finally tired of playing the martyr, son?" "No," Arthur said, watching his wife laugh at another man's joke. "I'm just tired of the noise. Make it stop." "Consider it done." Arthur hung up. Inside, the music seemed to get louder, but to Arthur, it sounded like the orchestra on the Titanic. The ride back to the Upper East Side was a blur of neon lights streaking across the tinted window of the Uber Black. Arthur sat in the back, the leather cool against his palms, watching the city breathe. New York was a monster that never slept, and tonight it felt particularly hungry. He checked his watch. 11:45 p.m. The gala would go on until at least 2. Then the after-party at the Box, a place Julian favored for its discreet decadence. Elena would be there. She would tell herself it was for networking, for the optics of the IPO. She would tell herself anything to justify the way Julian's hand lingered on her waist, the way his eyes promised her a world where she was a queen and he was the kingmaker. Arthur didn't hate her. That would have been easier. Hate is hot. It burns cleanly. What he felt was a cold, heavy gray, like wet concrete setting in his chest. The car pulled up to the curb of their townhouse. It was a masterpiece of modern renovation, a 4-story limestone structure that had been featured in Architectural Digest. The perfect blend of historical grandeur and minimalist future, the article had read. Arthur remembered reading it and laughing humorlessly. He had designed the renovation. He had drafted the plans, fought with the contractors, and selected the Italian marble for the kitchen island where he now ate his breakfast alone. But in the article, the credit was given to Elena Sterling's impeccable vision, with a footnote mentioning her husband managed the project. He unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped inside. The silence of the house was different from the silence of the car. It was oppressive. It was the silence of a museum after closing hours. Arthur walked into the kitchen, loosening his bow tie. He poured a glass of tap water, ignoring the wine fridge stocked with bottles that cost more than his father's yearly salary had been. He leaned against the counter, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the cavernous room. He thought about the call to Jonathan Vane. The dominoes were already tipping. He could almost hear the click-clack of their fall. By morning, the financial forensic team would be dissecting Julian's shell companies. By noon, the SEC would have the flagged transaction logs. But now, in the quiet dark, Arthur needed to be sure. Again. He walked upstairs to the master bedroom. It was pristine, the bed made with military precision by the housekeeper. Elena rarely slept here anymore. She often passed out in the guest suite because she had early calls and didn't want to disturb him. Arthur went to the walk-in closet. He moved a stack of cashmere sweaters on the top shelf, revealing a small, unassuming safe box. He punched in the code, a date from 10 years ago, the day they had met in a coffee shop in Bushwick, both broke and dreaming. Elena had likely forgotten the date, but she had never changed the safe code. Inside, nestled between her jewelry passport and backup hard drives, was a burner phone. He took it out. It was sleek, black, password protected. But Arthur knew the passcode. He knew everything. He had seen her type it in months ago, reflected in the window of a subway car while she thought he was asleep on her shoulder. 2580. A vertical line down the keypad. Efficient. Lazy. He unlocked it. The screen brightness stung his eyes. He scrolled through the messages, though he had memorized them already. Julian. The investors are eating out of my hand, just like you will later. Elena. Behave. Arthur is looking at me. Julian. Let him look. He doesn't see anything. He's furniture, Elle. Expensive, comfortable furniture. Arthur stopped scrolling. Furniture. He put the phone down on the velvet island in the center of the closet. He looked at his reflection in the full-length mirror. The tuxedo fit perfectly. His face was sharp, his eyes clear. He didn't look like a victim. He didn't look like a cuckold. He looked like a man waiting for a demolition charge to detonate. He remembered the night he wrote the core code for the biomimicry algorithm that GenNova was built on. It was 3 years ago. Elena had been crying at the kitchen table, her startup capital nearly gone, her original code failing to predict the protein folding patterns. She was ready to quit. I can fix it, Arthur had said, putting down his drafting pen. You're an architect, Artie, not a bioengineer, she had snapped, stress fraying her voice. Pattern recognition is pattern recognition, whether it's load-bearing walls or amino acid chains. He had worked for 72 hours straight. He drank stale coffee and didn't shower. When he finally cracked it, when the simulation ran perfectly, predicting the viral mutation with 99.9% accuracy, Elena had looked at him like he was a god. They had made love on the floor of that tiny apartment, amidst the printed lines of code. We did it, she had whispered. You did it, he had corrected her, kissing her forehead. This is your company. I just built the foundation. He had signed the IP over to GenNova the next day, a gift, a husband's devotion. But because he was who he was, a man who understood that every, always say, structure needs an emergency exit, he had added the Vane clause in the transfer agreement. A clause buried in legal jargon that stated if the original transferor, Arthur, deemed the company's ethical direction compromised, the rights to the source code would revert to a holding trust managed by Jonathan Vane's firm. Elena had never read the fine print. She was too busy popping champagne. Arthur picked up the burner phone again and placed it carefully back in the safe. He didn't need it for the legal battle. The financial crimes would bury Julian. The IP reversion would bury Elena's control over the company. This phone was just for him, a reminder of why mercy was no longer an option. He left the bedroom and went to his study, the one room in the house that felt like his. It was cluttered, filled with blueprints, models of bridges, and sketches of buildings that would never be built. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. The screen illuminated his face. He opened a terminal window, a simple black screen with a blinking green cursor. He typed in a command string. Access remote server, GN mainframe. User, Architects01. Password. Access granted. The entire digital infrastructure of GenNova lay before him. He could see the traffic, the pre-IPO data packets being prepared for the NASDAQ servers. He could see the user logs. Julian was currently logged in from a mobile device, likely checking the stock futures. Arthur's finger hovered over the enter key. He could shut it all down right now. He could turn GenNova's billion-dollar algorithm into a brick before the sun came up. But that was too fast. That was emotional. Arthur was a slow-burn man. He wanted them to feel the ground shake first. He wanted them to see the cracks in the walls before the roof came down. He typed a different command, a script that would simply illuminate. Deploy script, ghost light. Target, financial audit logs, public DAR. He didn't destroy data. He simply moved the hidden, encrypted folder containing Julian's embezzlement records into the public shared drive of the company. It was sitting there now, visible to anyone who opened the shared documents folder. The junior analysts arriving at 7 a.m. would see it first. Then the CFO. Then the world. He closed the laptop. Downstairs, the front door slammed. Arthur froze. It was 2 a.m. Early for them. He heard muffled voices in the foyer, laughter, the clatter of heels being kicked off. "Shh, you'll wake the house pet," a male voice sneered. Julian. Arthur sat very still in the dark study. They had brought the party home. The audacity was breathtaking. It was a violation so absolute, it almost felt like a performance art piece. "He sleeps like the dead," Elena's voice floated up, slurred with alcohol and arousal. "Besides, he's probably wearing earplugs. He hates the city noise." "God, he's such a bore," Julian groaned. "I don't know how you survived 5 years." "He was useful once," Elena said. The past tense hung in the air like smoke. Footsteps started up the stairs. They were heading to the master bedroom. Arthur stood up. He straightened his tuxedo jacket. He walked to the door of his study, which opened onto the landing of the second floor. He didn't turn on the light. He just stood there, a shadow within the shadows. As Elena and Julian reached the top of the stairs, giggling like teenagers, Arthur stepped out. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, silhouetted by the moonlight streaming through the atrium skylight. Elena gasped, stumbling back. Julian stiffened, his hand dropping from Elena's waist. "Arthur?" Elena breathed, her hand flying to her chest. "Jesus, you scared me. Why are you standing there in the dark?" Arthur looked at them. He looked at Julian's loosened tie, at the lipstick smear on his collar. He looked at Elena's disheveled hair. "I was just checking the foundation," Arthur said softly, "making sure it can hold the weight." "What?" Julian scoffed, regaining his composure. "What are you talking about, man? Go to bed. We have a strategy meeting to finish." "Strategy," Arthur repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, I suppose you do." He looked Julian dead in the eye. For a second, the investor faltered. There was something in Arthur's gaze that wasn't the house pet he mocked. It was the cold calculation of a predator who knows the trap has already been sprung. "Good night, Elena," Arthur said. He didn't acknowledge Julian again. He turned and walked back into his study, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. He heard them whispering frantically outside, unsettled, the mood broken. Arthur sat back down at his desk. He pulled a bottle of cheap whiskey from his drawer, the kind he used to drink when he was a starving artist. He poured a shot. Let them have their confusion for tonight. Tomorrow, they would have nothing else. Morning in the Sterling household arrived not with the warmth of the sun, but with the sharp mechanical hiss of the espresso machine. It was 6:30 a.m. The light filtering through the limestone townhouse windows was gray and unyielding, typical of a New York autumn morning that promised rain. Arthur stood in the kitchen, fully dressed. Not in his usual house husband attire, soft cardigans and chinos, but in a charcoal suit, tailored to a razor's edge. He looked like the man he used to be before he became Elena's shadow. He placed a porcelain cup on a saucer. A double shot of espresso, 1 sugar cube, a twist of lemon peel, Elena's hangover cure. He heard her before he saw her, the heavy, uneven tread of someone fighting a headache and the residual guilt of the night before. Elena entered the kitchen wrapping a silk robe tightly around herself. Her face was pale, stripped of the gala's glamour, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. She stopped when she saw him. Her eyes flicked over his suit. "You're dressed early," she croaked, her voice raspy. "Going somewhere?" "Errands," Arthur said, sliding the espresso across the marble island toward her. "Drink. You have a board meeting at 9. Elena took the cup with trembling hands. She didn't say thank you. She took a sip, wincing at the heat. God, my head feels like it's splitting open. Julian kept pouring that vintage swill until 3 a.m. "Julian has a high tolerance for excess," Arthur said, turning back to the counter to wipe down a non-existent speck of dust. "Not everyone can keep up." Elena shot him a glare over the rim of her cup. "Don't start, Arthur. I'm not in the mood for your passive-aggressive judgment. You embarrassed me last night, standing in the dark like a creep." "I wasn't hiding, Elena. I live here." "Well, it felt like you were spying." She set the cup down hard. "Julian was uncomfortable. He thinks you're plotting something." Arthur turned slowly. He rested his hands on the counter, leaning forward slightly. "And what would I plot, Elena? I'm just the man who walks the dog, remember?" Elena opened her mouth to retort, to deliver another cutting remark designed to put him back in his box, but her phone began to buzz. It wasn't a text vibration. It was a call. Then another. Then a flood of notifications that lit up the screen like a strobe light. She frowned, picking it up. "Who is calling me at 6:45? She looked at the screen. CFO. Urgent. VP of Engineering. Urgent. Julian Thorne. 3 missed calls. A flicker of genuine fear crossed her face. In the startup world, a phone blowing up this early usually meant a server crash, a lawsuit, or a PR disaster. She answered the CFO's call on speaker, her thumb slipping on the screen. "What is it, Marcus? I'm barely awake." "Elena, you need to get to the office. Now." Marcus's voice was high, tight, bordering on hysteria. "Is Julian with you?" "No, he left an hour ago. What's happening?" "The shared drive, Elena. The public internal server. The one the interns, the janitors, the whole damn company can access." "What about it?" "Someone moved a folder into it. It's labeled Project Icarus. Elena, it's everything. The Cayman accounts, the diverted seed funding, the emails between Julian and the shell companies. It's all there. It's been there since 2 a.m. Elena's face went the color of ash. The cup of espresso rattled against the saucer. "That's impossible. Those files are encrypted on Julian's private server. It's air-gapped." "Well, they aren't anymore. The junior analysts are already reading them. Someone took screenshots. It's leaking to Twitter, Elena. TechCrunch just tweeted asking for a comment on massive embezzlement allegations pre-IPO. Elena dropped the phone. It clattered onto the marble, the screen cracking, a spiderweb fracture right over the time. She looked at Arthur. Arthur didn't look surprised. He didn't look worried. He was checking his watch. "You?" Elena whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. But she couldn't finish the thought. It was too absurd. Arthur? The man who made her coffee? The man who hadn't written a line of code in 3 years? You should probably go, Arthur said calmly. Traffic will be bad on the FDR Drive. Did you do this? Her voice rose to a shriek. Did you touch my computer? I haven't touched your computer in years, Elena. You told me not to, remember? Leave the tech to the professionals. She stared at him, her chest heaving. The phone on the counter buzzed again. Julian. She snatched the phone and ran. She didn't even change out of her robe. She grabbed her coat from the rack, shoved her feet into loafers, and sprinted out the front door. The heavy slam echoed through the house, vibrating the floorboards. Arthur stood alone in the silence. He walked over to the island and picked up the espresso cup she had abandoned. It was still warm. He carried it to the sink and poured it out. A waste of good beans. He walked to the hallway mirror and adjusted his tie. He looked at the man in the reflection. There was no joy in his eyes, only a grim determination. He wasn't doing this because he wanted to destroy her. He was doing it because she had already destroyed them. She had turned their partnership into a dictatorship, and he was simply staging a coup. He put on his overcoat. He didn't take his keys to the house. He wouldn't be coming back here, not as a husband. He walked out the door, leaving it unlocked. Outside, the air was crisp. He hailed a yellow cab, ignoring the Uber app. He wanted to disappear into the analog world. Where to, Mac? The driver asked, chewing on a toothpick. Wall Street, Arthur said. The Vane building. The driver whistled. Big money today, huh? Something like that, Arthur replied. As the cab merged into the morning traffic, Arthur pulled his phone out. He opened the news app. The headline was already breaking. Unicorn in flames. Genova leaks reveal massive fraud days before IPO. Below it, a photo of Julian Thorne, looking arrogant at a previous gala. And beside him, Elena, looking adoringly at him. Arthur scrolled down to the comments. The internet was already tearing them apart. But he wasn't interested in the public opinion. He was interested in the one opinion that mattered. The cab stopped in front of an imposing Gothic Revival skyscraper in the financial district. It looked less like an office building and more like a fortress. This was the home of Vane Holdings, the old money that moved in silence, far away from the tech bro culture of Silicon Valley. Arthur paid the driver with cash and stepped onto the sidewalk. He looked up at the spire disappearing into the low clouds. He wasn't just an architect. He was the one who had designed the hidden structural supports for Genova, and now he was here to pull the pin. He walked through the revolving doors. The security guard, a burly man who looked like he chewed gravel for breakfast, stepped forward to block him. Appointments. Only, sir, Mr. Vane doesn't see walk-ins. Tell him Arthur Sterling is here, Arthur said, his voice low, devoid of arrogance but heavy with authority. Tell him the architect is ready to sign off on the demolition. The guard hesitated, looking at Arthur's eyes. There was something there that made him pause. He lifted his radio. Arthur waited. He thought of Elena running through the glass corridors of her office, shouting at people, watching her empire turn to dust. He felt a pang of sadness, sharp and brief. He had loved her. He really had. Mr. Sterling. The guard lowered the radio, looking surprised. Top floor, private elevator. He's expecting you. Arthur nodded. He walked toward the elevator, leaving the noise of the street behind. The ascent began. The elevator doors did not ding. They simply slid open with a heavy, hydraulic sigh, revealing a room that belonged to a different century. Arthur stepped onto a Persian rug that was likely older than the United States. The air here was different, filtered, cool, and smelling of old leather, pipe tobacco, and ink. There were no open-plan desks, no ping-pong tables, no motivational neon signs, just walls of dark mahogany bookshelves stretching 20 feet high, filled with bound volumes that had never been digitized. Sitting in a wingback chair near a fireplace that crackled with low flames was Jonathan Vane. The billionaire was in his 80s, a man whose skin looked like parchment paper stretched over steel wire. He didn't look up from the Financial Times as Arthur approached. "Most men would have burned it down immediately," Vane said, his voice dry and precise. "You let them build the skyscraper first. Then you detonated the basement." Arthur stopped in front of the desk. He didn't sit. "It wasn't about the destruction, Jonathan. It was about the weight. I needed to see if they could carry it. They couldn't." Vane finally looked up. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue, eyes that had seen crashes, depressions, and wars. He folded the newspaper. On the front page, a small sidebar mentioned the rumored instability of the upcoming Genova IPO. By tomorrow, that sidebar would be the headline. "Julian Thorne called me 3 times this morning," Vane said, gesturing to an antique rotary phone on his desk. "He was screaming about a hacker, about corporate sabotage. He wanted to know if I could pull strings with the SEC. And what did you tell him?" "I told him I was retired and that my hearing isn't what it used to be." Vane allowed a small, cruel smile to touch his lips. "I hired Julian because he was hungry. I didn't realize he was a cannibal." Arthur walked to the window. The view here was higher than the penthouse. From here, the city looked like a complex architectural model. "He didn't just steal the money, Jonathan. He corrupted the design," Arthur said softly. "The algorithm, the biomimicry code, was meant to cure genetic defects. I designed it to find harmony in chaos." Julian and Elena. They tweaked the parameters. They turned it into a data mining tool for insurance companies. They're selling patient risks, not cures. This was the secret Arthur had uncovered in the hidden files. It wasn't just the affair. The affair was painful, but the corruption of his life's work was unforgivable. Vane nodded slowly. "And that triggers the clause." Clause 14b, Arthur cited from memory, the moral hazard provision. Vane opened a leather folder on his desk. Inside lay a single document, yellowed slightly at the edges. It was the original transfer deed Arthur had signed 3 years ago. In the world of venture capital, nobody read the full contracts of spousal transfers. When Elena brought the IP rights to the table, Julian's lawyers had glanced at it, saw the transfer of ownership, and stamped it. They saw Arthur as a pushover husband gifting his wife a toy. They hadn't noticed that the gift was actually a conditional lease. The clause was simple. Should the intellectual property be used for purposes violating the original ethical charter, or should the company engage in financial malfeasance, all rights to the source code and its derivatives revert immediately to the original creator, Arthur Sterling, via the Vane Trust. "You know what this means, Arthur," Vane said, his tone serious. "Once you sign this execution order, Genova is worthless. It's an empty shell. The technology, the product they are selling to Wall Street next week, will legally belong to you. They will be selling a car with no engine." "I know," Arthur said. "Elena will be destitute. She leveraged the house, her savings, everything on this IPO. She'll be liable for millions in investor lawsuits." Arthur turned from the window. He thought of Elena's face last night, the way she looked through him, the way she laughed at Julian's joke about the house pet. He thought of the years he spent supporting her, cooking her meals, rubbing her back when she was stressed, believing in her when no one else did. He realized he wasn't killing his wife. The woman he loved had died the moment she chose ambition over integrity. He was just burying the stranger who had taken her place. "She made her choice," Arthur said. "She chose the partner she deserved." He walked to the desk, picked up the heavy fountain pen, and signed his name at the bottom of the document. The ink flowed black and permanent. Arthur Sterling. Vane watched him, nodding with approval. He picked up the phone receiver. "Who are you calling?" Arthur asked. "The legal team," Vane said. "They will file the injunction within the hour. By noon, a cease and desist order regarding the use of your technology will be served to the Gen Nova headquarters." Vane paused, holding the receiver to his chest. "You're a dangerous man, Arthur. You play the long game. I like that." "I'm just an architect, Jonathan," Arthur said, buttoning his coat. "I fix structural flaws." "Where will you go now?" Arthur looked at the door, to watch it fall. Scene shift. Gen Nova headquarters, 10 o'clock a.m. The atmosphere in the Gen Nova conference room was toxic. The air conditioning was blasting, but everyone was sweating. Elena paced the length of the room, her heels clicking like gunshots. Julian sat at the head of the table, his tie undone, screaming into a cell phone. "I don't care what the logs say. Just scrub it. Delete the whole server if you have to," Julian roared, then slammed the phone down. "Useless idiots!" "They can't delete it, Julian," Elena said, her voice trembling. "It's on the public drive. It's been mirrored. My inbox is full of resignation letters. The SEC is in the lobby. They're waiting for a warrant." "We can spin this," Julian said, his eyes darting around the room, manic desperation setting in. "We blame a rogue employee. We blame Arthur. Yes, we say your jealous, incompetent husband hacked the system to frame us." Elena stopped pacing. She looked at Julian. For the first time, the handsome veneer stripped away, she saw him for what he was, a cornered rat. "Arthur?" she said. "Arthur doesn't know how to hack a server. He doesn't even know his Netflix password." "He was at the house last night," Julian argued. "He was acting weird, standing in the dark. He did this, Elena. We pin it on him. We say he's mentally unstable." Before Elena could respond, the glass doors of the conference room swung open. It wasn't the police. It was a team of 4 lawyers in expensive gray suits carrying briefcases. They didn't look like criminal defense attorneys. They looked like executioners. "Who the hell are you?" Julian barked. "We're in a crisis meeting." The lead lawyer, a woman with a face like stone, stepped forward. She didn't look at Julian. She looked directly at Elena. "Mrs. Sterling?" she asked. "Yes," Elena whispered. The lawyer handed her a thick envelope. "My name is Sarah Jenkins, representing the Vane Trust and Mr. Arthur Sterling. We are serving you with an immediate injunction." "Injunction for what?" Julian scoffed. "Divorce papers? Tell him to wait in line." "No, Mr. Thorne," the lawyer said, turning to him with a pitying look. "This is a notification of IP reversion. Under Clause 14B of the Founding Charter, due to demonstrated financial malfeasance and ethical violations, the rights to the biomimicry algorithm have reverted to Mr. Sterling, effective immediately." The room went silent, dead silent. That's bullshit," Julian stammered. "He gave that to us. It's ours." "He gave you a conditional license," the lawyer corrected. "You broke the conditions. As of 9:58 a.m. today, Gen Nova is utilizing stolen proprietary technology. You are ordered to cease all operations immediately. The servers are being locked remotely as we speak." Elena stared at the paper in her hand. The words swam before her eyes. Arthur Sterling, sole proprietor, breach of contract, the screens on the wall, the ones displaying the company dashboard, suddenly flickered. The complex graphs and data streams vanished. In their place, a single line of text appeared on the massive monitors, typed in a simple, elegant font. "System halted. Foundation unstable." Elena covered her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. She recognized the phrase. It was something Arthur used to say to her when they were building card towers on rainy Sundays. If the foundation is unstable, the castle must come down. She looked at Julian. He was staring at the blank screens, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The business partner who had promised her the world had just lost the only thing that gave him value. And somewhere in the city, Arthur was watching. The disintegration of an empire usually happens in silence, a signed paper, a whispered command, but the collapse of Gen Nova was deafening. By 11 o'clock a.m., the sleek, glass-walled lobby of the headquarters in the meatpacking district was a chaotic sea of flashing cameras, shouting reporters, and bewildered employees carrying cardboard boxes. The news vans had double-parked all along 9th Avenue, their satellite dishes raised like vultures waiting to feed. Inside the executive suite on the top floor, the air conditioning had stopped humming, replaced by the thick, suffocating heat of panic. Elena stood by the window, looking down at the circus below. She felt detached, as if she were watching a movie of her own life. Her phone was still vibrating on the table, a relentless, buzzing insect. It was her mother, her college friends, the wedding planner for the gala she was supposed to host next week. "Stop staring at the window and help me!" Julian screamed. He was on his knees near the shredder, jamming stacks of paper into the feed slot. The machine whirred and choked, jamming on the thick, bonded paper of falsified audit reports. "It's over, Julian," Elena said, her voice hollow. "The servers are locked. The lawyers said the IP is gone. Without the code, Gen Nova is just a rented office and a logo." Julian stood up, his face flushed a blotchy red. He kicked the shredder. "It's not over. I have friends. I have leverage. I just need to get to the Cayman's accounts before they freeze them. I need a jet." He ran to her, grabbing her shoulders. His grip was painful. "You need to sign a statement, Elena, right now. Write that you authorized the transfers. Say it was an R&D strategy." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. The charm was gone. The visionary investor who had seduced her with talk of disrupting the industry and living at the speed of light was just a sweaty, terrified conman in a wrinkled suit. "You want me to go to prison for you?" Elena whispered, pulling away. "That's your plan?" "We're partners, aren't we?" Julian hissed, his eyes wide and manic. "You enjoyed the ride, didn't you? The parties, the magazine covers? You think that was free? You think Arthur's little paycheck paid for your lifestyle?" The mention of Arthur's name cut through the fog in Elena's brain. Arthur. She looked at the black screens on the wall, still displaying the white text. System halted. Arthur hadn't just locked the door. He had trapped them inside the burning building. And the terrifying part was, he hadn't done it with a scream or a gun. He had done it with paperwork. It was the most Arthur thing imaginable. Lethal bureaucracy. Suddenly, the heavy double doors to the suite burst open. It wasn't the lawyers this time. "FBI, hands where I can see them." A dozen agents in windbreakers swarmed the room, guns drawn but pointed low. Behind them, men in suits with SEC badges walked in with the grim purpose of undertakers. Julian froze. For a second, he looked like he might run toward the private elevator, but two agents were already on him. They spun him around, slamming him against the mahogany conference table, the same table where he had mocked Arthur just 12 hours ago. "Julian Thorne," an agent announced, cuffing his hands behind his back. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement." "This is a mistake," Julian shouted, his face pressed against the wood. "I'm a venture capitalist. You can't touch me. My lawyers will have your badges." "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited, bored, hoisting him up. Elena stood frozen near the window. An agent approached her, looking less aggressive but equally firm. "Mrs. Sterling?" "Yes," she whispered. "We have a warrant to seize all electronic devices and financial records. You are not under arrest at this moment, but you are a person of interest. Do not leave the city." They didn't arrest her. That was almost worse. They didn't think she was the mastermind. They thought she was the accessory, the fool. She watched as they dragged Julian out. As he passed her, he didn't look at her with love or apology. He looked at her with pure venom. "You and your husband," Julian spat, spittle flying from his lips. "You set me up. You planned this." The doors closed. The room was suddenly quiet, save for the agents rifling through drawers and bagging laptops. Elena walked to her desk. Her legs gave out, and she sank into her Herman Miller chair. She looked at the photo frame on her desk. It was a picture of her and Julian at the groundbreaking ceremony. She had put Arthur's photo in the drawer months ago. She opened the drawer now. There was Arthur's photo. It was from 5 years ago, taken on a ferry to Staten Island. The wind was messing up his hair, and he was laughing, a genuine, unguarded laugh. He looked kind. He looked safe. She picked up her personal cell phone, the only device the FBI hadn't bagged yet. Her hands shook so badly she had to use both thumbs to dial. Arthur. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. She expected him to send it to voicemail. She expected silence. "Hello, Elena." His voice was calm. There was background noise, clinking, cups, low chatter. He sounded like he was in a cafe. "Arthur," she sobbed, the dam finally breaking. "They took Julian. The FBI is here. They took everything." "I know," Arthur said. "I'm watching on the news." "Arthur, you have to stop this. Please. They're going to ruin me. The IP, the company, it's my life." "It was our life, Elena," Arthur corrected gently. "Then it became your career. Then it became his piggy bank." "I didn't know," she lied. Then, hearing the silence on the line, she corrected herself. "I didn't want to know. I'm sorry, Arthur. I'm so sorry. Please, just unlock the code. We can fix this. I'll fire Julian. I'll come home." "You can't come home, Elena," Arthur said. His voice wasn't angry. It was sad, like he was speaking to a child who had broken a vase that couldn't be glued back together. "The house is leveraged against the company assets. The bank will foreclose by the end of the month." Elena gasped. "What? But where will I go?" "I don't know," Arthur said. "But you're a survivor, Elena. You're ambitious. You'll figure it out." "Arthur, don't do this. I'm your wife." "I filed the divorce papers this morning," he said. "In citations of the fraud, I've requested no alimony. And since the company debt is in your name—" "Arthur!" she screamed. "One last thing, Elena." "What?" she wept. "That day on the ferry, the photo you kept in your drawer?" Elena looked down at the picture in her hand. "Yes. You were looking at the Statue of Liberty. I was looking at you. That was the difference between us. You always looked for the next big thing. I was just happy with what I had. Arthur, please. Goodbye, Elena." The line went dead. Elena stared at the phone. Then she looked out the window again. Across the street, on the corner of 9th Avenue, there was a small French bistro with outdoor seating. A man in a charcoal suit was sitting at a small round table. He had a phone to his ear. As she watched, he lowered the phone. He placed some cash on the table, stood up, and buttoned his coat. He looked up at the glass tower. He couldn't see her. The windows were tinted, but he looked right at the spot where she stood. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just turned and walked away, disappearing into the river of people flowing down the avenue. Elena pressed her hand against the cold glass. Behind her, an FBI agent cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we need the password to this safe." Elena closed her eyes. The silence of the room was no longer empty. It was heavy with the weight of everything she had lost. 72 hours after the FBI raid, New York City had already metabolized the scandal of Genova. The headlines had shifted from shocking fraud to the fall of the biotech queen, analyzing Elena's wardrobe choices during the raid rather than the intricacies of the code theft. Elena stood on the sidewalk outside Le Bernardin. It was raining, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked through her trench coat. She wasn't there to eat. She was there because it was the monthly luncheon of the Future Founders Circle, an exclusive group of women CEOs where she was scheduled to be the keynote speaker. She needed this. She needed to show face. If she could just explain to them, to Claire, to Rebecca, to the women she had brunched with for years, that she was a victim of Julian's manipulation, she could salvage her reputation. She could pivot. She walked toward the entrance, chin up, fighting the tremble in her hands. The maitre d', a man who had greeted her by name for 5 years, stepped in front of the door. He didn't smile. He didn't offer to take her umbrella. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm afraid I cannot admit you today." Elena froze. "Henri, don't be ridiculous. I'm the keynote speaker. Claire is expecting me." "Miss Davis," he said, referring to the chairwoman of the circle, "called ahead. She requested that we manage the guest list to avoid any media disruption." Media disruption? Elena laughed, a brittle cracking sound. "I'm a founding member, Henri. Get out of my way." She tried to step around him. Henri didn't move. 2 large security guards in black suits materialized from the shadows of the awning. They weren't the usual polite doormen. They were bouncers. "Please don't make a scene, ma'am," Henri said, his eyes darting to the street where a paparazzo was already raising a camera lens. "Your reservation has been canceled. Indefinitely." Elena looked through the glass doors. Inside she saw them. Claire, Rebecca, the woman who had mocked Arthur at the party. They were laughing, drinking white wine, bathed in the warm, golden light of the restaurant. Claire looked up. Her eyes met Elena's through the rain-streaked glass. There was no sympathy. There was only a cold, detached curiosity, like looking at a car wreck on the highway. Claire turned away and said something to the group. They all laughed. It was the same laughter, the same jagged, exclusionary laughter that had been directed at Arthur just 3 nights ago. Now, the target had shifted. Elena stepped back, the rain plastering her hair to her forehead. She realized then that she hadn't been invited because she was brilliant. She had been invited because she was winning. And now that she was losing, she was toxic waste. Across town, the atmosphere was different. It was the quiet of finality. Arthur stood in the center of the living room of the Upper East Side townhouse. The room was filled with cardboard boxes, but they weren't for moving in. He was packing only what was his. It didn't take much. A few boxes of books, his drafting tools, his old vinyl records, the clothes he had bought before the money came. The rest, the Italian leather sofas, the crystal vases, the massive abstract paintings Elena had bought to impress guests, he left behind. They belonged to the bank now, or the lawyers, or the void. He heard the front door open. He didn't turn around. He knew it wasn't Elena. She was staying at a hotel, too ashamed to face him, and legally barred from the premises while the assets were being appraised. You travel light for a man who technically owns the most valuable algorithm in the city. Arthur turned. Leaning against the doorframe was Julian Thorne. Julian was out on bail. He looked terrible. The tan was gone, replaced by a gray pallor. He hadn't shaved in days, and he was wearing a hoodie instead of a suit. The ankle monitor bulged under his jeans. The door was unlocked, Julian muttered, stepping inside. I came to see if Elena was here. She's not, Arthur said, taping up a box labeled sketchbooks. And you're violating your bail conditions by being near a potential witness. I just wanted to talk, Arthur. Julian walked further into the room, looking around at the half-packed life. You really burned it all down, didn't you? Scorched earth. I didn't light the match, Julian. I just opened the windows so the fire could breathe. Julian laughed, a bitter, hacking sound. You know, at the party, I thought you were pathetic, a gelding. I told Elena, how can you sleep with a man who has no ambition? Arthur picked up a stack of architectural blueprints, plans for a community center he had designed pro bono years ago, a project Elena had made him abandon because it didn't pay well. I have plenty of ambition, Julian, Arthur said calmly. I just don't have a price. Julian stared at him. The power dynamic in the room was palpable. The master of the universe was now a criminal facing 20 years, and the house pet was the only free man standing. Can you stop it? Julian asked, his voice dropping to a plea. The vein clause. If you retract the claim, if you say it was a misunderstanding, the fraud charges might drop to negligence. I could cut a deal. Elena could save the house. Arthur looked at Julian. He didn't feel anger anymore. He just felt tired. You mocked me for being a silent partner, Arthur said. You thought silence meant stupidity, but silence is just structure, Julian. It's the space between the beams that holds the building up. You broke the structure. He picked up his box. The claim stands. The code belongs to the trust. It will be open-sourced, given to hospitals for free, as it was intended. Julian's jaw dropped. Free? You're going to give away $1 billion? It's not about the money, Arthur said, walking past him toward the door. It never was. He stopped at the threshold and looked back at Julian, who stood diminished in the center of the ruins. By the way, Arthur added, the Nespresso machine is yours. I never liked the coffee. It tasted artificial. Arthur walked out of the townhouse and down the limestone steps. A moving van was waiting, not a luxury service, just a regular man with a van. Arthur loaded his few boxes. He looked up at the house one last time. He saw the window where he used to wait for Elena to come home. He felt a phantom ache in his chest, the ghost of the love he had tried so hard to save. But then the wind shifted. The rain stopped. The clouds broke, revealing a sliver of cold, hard blue sky. He climbed into the passenger seat of the van. Where to, buddy? The driver asked. Brooklyn, Arthur said. The Navy Yard. I have a studio to set up. He didn't look back as the van pulled away, leaving the Upper East Side and the empty shells of Julian and Elena behind him. The Brooklyn Navy Yard was a graveyard of industry that had been resurrected into a cathedral of creation. Massive brick warehouses, once used to build battleships, now housed artists, fabricators, and architects who preferred the smell of sawdust to the scent of money. Arthur's studio was on the 4th floor of Building 77. It was a cavernous space with 20-foot ceilings, exposed piping, and a wall of industrial windows that framed the Manhattan skyline across the East River. From here, the city looked like a distant, glittering circuit board. Beautiful to look at, but dangerous to touch. It was late. The rain was hammering against the glass, a rhythmic, soothing percussion. Arthur stood at a wide drafting table, the warm glow of an angle-poised lamp illuminating a large sheet of vellum. He was drawing by hand. No CAD software, no algorithms, just graphite, a T-square, and the friction of pencil on paper. He was designing a library, a public space, free entry. The heavy metal door at the far end of the studio groaned open. Arthur didn't look up. I told security to let you up, Elena. You don't need to knock. The click-clack of heels on the polished concrete floor was uneven, hesitant. It was a sound Arthur had never associated with his wife. Elena had always walked with the purpose of a woman who owned the ground she stepped on. She came into the circle of light. She was wearing a trench coat that cost $5,000, but it was soaked through. Her hair, usually a helmet of perfect waves, was plastered to her cheeks. Her mascara was smudged, giving her the look of a tragic heroine in a noir film, or perhaps just a woman who had run out of options. You live in a warehouse, she said. Her voice was brittle, trying to find a foothold in sarcasm and failing. It's a studio, Arthur corrected, blowing eraser dust off the paper. And it's quiet. It's cold, she whispered, hugging herself. There's a heater by the sofa. She didn't move toward the heater. She walked to the edge of the drafting table, gripping the wood as if it were a life raft. She looked at the drawing, the clean lines, the structural integrity. You always were good at this, she said softly, seeing things before they existed. And you were good at selling them, Arthur replied, his tone neutral. We were a good team. Once. We still can be, Elena said, the desperation finally leaking through. She reached out, her hand hovering, over his arm, but not daring to touch the fabric of his sweater. Arthur, please. The lawyers. They say you're open sourcing the code. You're giving it away. That's madness. It's worth billions. Arthur finally looked at her. His eyes were tired but clear. It's worth nothing, Elena. It was built on a lie. You can't build a skyscraper on a sinkhole. It swallows everything eventually. Look at us. I didn't know, Elena cried, her voice cracking. I didn't know Julian was stealing. I just thought he was aggressive. I thought that's how business worked. You knew, Arthur said. He didn't shout. He said it with the weight of a judge delivering a verdict. You knew when he bought the Ferrari with company funds. You knew when the audits were delayed. You knew when you started sleeping with him because you thought he was the winner and I was the loser. Elena flinched as if he had slapped her. I was lonely, Arthur. You were so distant. You were always in your head. I was in my head because I was solving the problems you created, Arthur said. He put down his pencil. I was the one who stayed up fixing the bugs while you were at gala dinners. I was the one who balanced the books in the beginning. I was the silence that let you be loud. He walked around the table, closing the distance between them. For the first time, Elena looked small. You think I did this for revenge? Arthur asked. Didn't you? She accused, tears spilling over. You humiliated us. You destroyed Genova. You made that call to Vane because you were jealous. No, Arthur shook his head. I made the call because you broke the covenant. The marriage vows? The work, Arthur said fiercely. The code was meant to heal people, Elena. You and Julian turned it into a weapon for insurance companies to deny coverage. You took something pure and made it ugly. That was the betrayal I couldn't forgive. The affair, that was just mundane. That was just you being weak. But corrupting the work, that was unforgivable. Elena stared at him. She realized then that she had never truly understood him. She thought he was a romantic, a soft man who needed her strength. She hadn't realized he was a purist, a man of iron principles who would burn the world down to save the truth. I have nothing, Arthur, she whispered. The bank took the house today. Julian is going to prison. My friends won't return my calls. I have nowhere to go. The silence stretched in the vast room, amplified by the rain. Arthur looked at the woman he had married. He remembered the day they met, the way she laughed, the way they shared a slice of pizza on a park bench. He felt a pang of sorrow, sharp and deep. But he also felt the cold draft from the window. He walked over to a small side table. He picked up a checkbook. He wrote a figure, tore out the check, and held it out to her. Elena looked at it. It wasn't a fortune. It was enough for a few months' rent in a modest apartment. Maybe some therapy. What is this? She asked. Severance, Arthur said. Severance? She looked at him, appalled. I'm your wife, not your employee. The divorce will be finalized in a few weeks, Arthur said, placing the check in her trembling hand. Use this to start over. Somewhere else. Find who you were before the money, Elena. She was a nice person. I miss her. Arthur, she sobbed, reaching for him. He stepped back, a clear physical boundary. Go, Elena.
Don't do this. I love you." "No," Arthur said, turning his back to her and picking up his pencil. "You love the reflection of yourself you saw in my eyes, but the mirror is broken now." He bent over the drafting table, focusing on the line of a supporting beam. He heard her weeping behind him. He heard the hesitation, the hope that he would turn around and hold her. He didn't. He drew a line, straight, true, unwavering. After a long minute, he heard the heavy metal door groan open and then clang shut. The echo reverberated through the studio, bouncing off the brick walls until it faded into the sound of the rain. Arthur was alone. He looked up at the window. Across the river, the lights of Manhattan were still burning, frantic and bright. But here, in the dark quiet of the Navy Yard, the air was clean. He looked back at his drawing. Chapter 1. The Foundation. He wasn't just designing a library, he was designing the rest of his life. Winter came early to New York that year. By December, the city was wrapped in a coat of gray slush and biting wind. The kind of weather that forced everyone to look down and hurry, stripping away the pretense of casual strolling. 6 months had passed since the night of the gala. Arthur stood on the corner of Center Street, holding a paper cup of bodega coffee. The steam rose in the frigid air, curling around his face. Across the street, the heavy bronze doors of the Southern District Court of New York pushed open. A swarm of reporters surged forward, their microphones like spears. Flashbulbs popped in the gray daylight. Julian Thorne emerged, flanked by marshals. He looked smaller than Arthur remembered. The arrogance that had once filled rooms was gone, replaced by a stoop in his shoulders. He wore a cheap suit, likely provided by his public defender after his assets were frozen. He had just been sentenced to 12 years for securities fraud and grand larceny. Arthur watched from a distance. He didn't feel a surge of triumph. He didn't feel a vindictive thrill. He felt clinical. It was like watching a building being demolished after the safety perimeter had been set up. It was loud and messy, but necessary for the safety of the neighborhood. A few steps behind Julian, a woman exited the courthouse. Elena. She wasn't in handcuffs. Her cooperation deal had spared her prison, but the court of public opinion had been less merciful. She wore a simple wool coat, one Arthur recognized from years ago before the money. Her head was down, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses, ignoring the few photographers who bothered to snap her picture. She looked tired. She looked like just another New Yorker trying to survive the winter. She hailed a yellow cab. No black car waited for her. No assistant held the door. She got in, and the cab merged into the endless stream of traffic, carrying her back to a small apartment in Queens, back to a life of anonymity. Arthur took a sip of his coffee. It was bitter and hot. It tasted real. He turned away from the courthouse and began walking north. He walked all the way to the construction site on East Broadway. The chain-link fence was covered in green mesh, but through the gaps, you could see the steel skeleton of the new public library rising. "Mr. Sterling!" The foreman, a burly man named Kowalski, waved from the gate. "We're ready for the inspection on the truss work. You want a hard hat?" Arthur smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. "Always, Jim." He put on the white hard hat and walked onto the site. The noise here was different. It wasn't the chatter of gossip or the clinking of champagne glasses. It was the sound of rivet guns, of saws cutting wood, of men shouting instructions. It was the sound of things being built, not sold. He climbed the temporary stairs to the second floor. From here, he could see the layout of the reading room he had designed. It was open, flooded with natural light, or it would be once the glass was installed, designed to be a sanctuary for anyone who needed it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out.
It was an email from the Board of Trustees at the hospital network. Subject: Open Source Implementation. Message: Mr. Sterling, the first trials using the unencumbered biomimicry code have shown a 40% increase in diagnostic accuracy. We are rolling it out to 3 charity clinics next week. Thank you. Arthur deleted the email. He didn't need to save it. He didn't need a plaque. The code was doing what it was supposed to do. It was silent, invisible, and structural. He walked to the edge of the unfinished floor, looking out over the city. The wind whipped his coat. Below him, the city moved in its chaotic rhythm. People were rushing to meetings, checking their stock portfolios, falling in love, getting divorced, lying, and telling the truth. He thought about the man he was 6 months ago, the ghost in the tuxedo, standing in the corner of a penthouse, holding a glass of water, waiting for permission to exist. That man was dead. And the man who had destroyed an empire with a single phone call? He was gone too. That had been a necessary act of violence, a controlled demolition. What remained was just Arthur. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a celebrity. He was an architect with a studio in the Navy Yard, a project that mattered, and a quiet apartment where the coffee was bad, but the peace was absolute. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cold, dirty, magnificent air of New York. The revenge was complete. The ledger was balanced. There was no debt left to pay and no credit left to claim. "Hey, Arthur," Kowalski shouted from below. "We pouring the concrete for the entrance or what?" Arthur looked down. "Pour it," he called back. "Make it deep. This one needs to last." He turned his back on the skyline, on the memory of the penthouse, and walked toward the work that lay ahead. He blended into the dust and the steel. Just another worker in a city of millions, finally, perfectly invisible.